Ladies and gentlemen, let's now march ahead and invite our next prolific speaker who actually indulges in innovation in every design that he comes up with, because his design is a mix of creativity and technology, and he's also a firm believer in experimenting design with technology. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us none other than architect Nuru Karim, the founder and principal architect, NUDES, Mumbai. A huge round of applause to welcome on stage architect Nuru Karim.
Hi, good evening, and heartfelt congratulations to FOAID, and thank you for having me here. I'm not sure how this contraption looks on me with the hat, but I'd appreciate it if I can get your feedback sometime later. We have about 20 minutes, and just to dive into the presentation very quickly. The topic of this presentation is embracing the unknown and how fiction is quickly becoming fact. I just want to take you through a journey through time, just the way we actually worked in architectural studios, and what is also a slightly cliched picture. You see this picture in a lot of presentations, but it's the way architectural studios worked in the last century or so. And even as an architectural student, for the first 3 or 4 years, we actually had these drafting boards with sliders and spaces to put up our sheets of rolls and models and all that stuff. But traditionally, these were largely paper and pencil-based systems. This is the Hansel writing ball. It's arguably the first typewriter that was invented in 1865 by Hansel. And it basically had a ball-like surface which had 52 keys. On the right-hand side, you had consonants, and on the left-hand side, you had vowels. And interestingly enough, you actually couldn't see what you had typed out till you finished typing, and then the paper came out of the system. So that was the first writing machine, the writing ball, or the Hansen writing ball in 1865. I think it's also essential to understand how the computer evolved in the last 50, 60 years. And in the 1940s, we had this computer called ENIAC. ENIAC is the acronym for the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. And all it could actually do was solve a large number of mathematical calculations. So it could basically compute. It was like this big calculator. And you can actually see from this image the space that it occupied. This was in the 1940s. This was Ivan Sutherland's PhD thesis, which is called the Sketchpad. And the Sketchpad pioneered interaction between humans and computers. It was the first graphical user interface that connected humans with machines. And all it could do is have a couple of objects on them and connect them with constraints. So you could have a couple of dots, pull a line through them, move the dot around, the line moves, and you could change the angle. About 120 years after the Hansen writing ball was invented, we had the first 3D printer. And this was designed and created by Charles Decade in 1984. It was a stereolithography printer, very close to the solid doodle printers that we have now. And they basically patented the technique in 1986. So if you see the image on the top, it's an image from the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution is roughly a 100-year-long period, right? So we're talking from 1750 to 1850. And it rapidly changed the means of production that drastically altered the societies that participated in this revolution. It began as a result of steam power enabling muscle power, and that was replaced by machinery, and ended with a serious restructuring not only of the labor system, but also the entire social and political landscape around the revolution. The digital revolution, of course, is a different animal. It began practically with computerization across the last 60 years ago. And we are still yet to see the final outcome of the digital revolution. It's arguably slated as the fourth industrial revolution. So the computer and the digital are basically capturing our imagination and also influencing and shaping our experience of the world. While the Industrial Revolution created tools to augment the human body, you had the automobile, you had the steam engine, the digital revolution is actually augmenting the human intellect. This was the first wearable computer designed by Steve Mann in the 1980s. And if you actually compare it with Ivan Sutherland's Sketchpad, you will actually see how human-computer interaction is increasingly collapsing into wearable computing devices. Digital methodologies are the core of the development of the smart city concept, and I know there are lots of urbanists that have been delving with what is the definition of a smart city concept. But at the core of this definition rests the entire concept of hyper-augmented reality. So in this space also that we're in this beautiful shed, and even though it's a pop-up shed, but there are atoms and bits of information surrounding us as we speak. It's not only the, the impact is being felt on several industries, but even the retail scape is changing. This is the Amazon Prime Air drone picture that aims to deliver products in 30 minutes, right? This was tested successfully in the United States in 2013. I'm not sure if you've actually heard of the Drone Olympics, but you have the Drone Olympics. It's going to be a Biennale event once every 2 or 3 years. And recently it was in the news that a 14-year-old actually won that Drone Olympics, and he won something like 15 million bucks, millions of dollars, so to speak. And this is actually revolutionizing even the e-commerce industry. While as a country we might be, satisfied with going electric in the next 15, 20 years, the West has gotten even further ahead. They're talking about driverless cars, and the United Kingdom actually wants to be at the forefront of driverless cars and driverless technology. It believes this industry could be worth 28 billion pounds. And it plans to go commercial in the next 3 or 4 years. So that is the potential. Rolls-Royce is not going to be left behind. They have something called drone ships. And if you actually look at this, these are unmanned cargo ships without a single crew member on the ship transporting shipping containers and goods across the world. So you can see the impact that it will have in terms of mobility, in terms of freight, in terms of goods, in terms of commerce, and in terms of actually the way we would be using the built environment or the built landscape and natural landscapes. We get the sound, please? So this is, before we play, sorry, it's on, right? Sound? So this is actually Professor Hiroshi Ishiguro. I got it right. Can we get sound? It'll be... Can you play it again? Yeah. All right. Pump it up.
Professor Hiroshi Ishiguro is Japan's foremost android scientist, and Geminoid HI-1 is Japan's foremost android. Inspired by Japan's unique spiritual beliefs, they are blurring the boundaries between humans and robots.
It's a question of where the soul is. Japanese people have always been told the soul can exist in everything and anything. So we don't have any problem with the idea that a robot too has a soul. We don't make much distinction between humans and robots.
Creating a perfect copy of himself has proved useful to Professor Ishiguro in unexpected ways.
This robot is good enough to recreate the sense of human presence. For instance, it can give lectures to students or attend a meeting on my behalf. At the moment, we are at the Research Institute in Kyoto, but usually I work at Osaka University. Or I can even send it to America or Britain to attend a conference. The important thing is, my presence is there.
Robotics has become one of the key industries in Japan.
So I don't know if you got all of that, but you know, Hiroshi Ishiguro is a Japanese scientist, robotic scientist, and he created the Geminoid H1-2. It's a tele-operated android that has a similar presence to the Japanese scientist. And it's interesting what he said, because when you look at, you know, spirituality and what spirituality means in Japan, it talks about the soul existing everywhere. And he poses that question, is that if the soul can exist everywhere, the soul can even exist in a robot. The big question that he's asking is, what is human presence through this experiment? And he keeps asking that question, can human presence be transferred to another place? So if you see, it's not only the physical world that's changed, but also us. We are the same elements of the system absorbing several platforms, including and inherently being comfortable with a virtual identity. As we speak, we have a virtual identity. There are so many of these social apps. And in a sense, we aim to be hyper-individualistic. If you see the image on the left, that's a neural network map of a person using a social application. So basically what I would like to argue for through this presentation is that since the physical world has changed around us and is constantly morphing at a very rapid rate, how could these processes impact architecture and design is the fundamental question that I'm trying to ask and argue for. This is a man kicking a robo, right? It looks something like an animal on 4 legs. And this is from a firm called Boston Dynamics based in the United States. There were a branch of professors and students who graduated from the MIT and set up Boston Dynamics. And the idea was he kept kicking this robo on 4 legs, something like an animal. The robo always went back, found balance. But the idea was to keep kicking the robo to see whether it got a reaction. How would that robo react? And you know all the stuff with artificial intelligence and robotic engineering and robotic technologies, where this discourse is coming from. Sound, please. This is Spot Mini, and it's a small 4-legged robo that comfortably fits in an office or a home. It's about 25, 30 kilos. And it basically has, it's based on an electric charge. On one charge, it can basically run for about 90 minutes. It's able to pick up objects and handle objects with a 5-degree angle rotation. And it is completely armored by sensors, motion sensors, actuators, pistons. A lot of these sensors help in terms of navigation and mobile manipulation of Spot Mini. The digital also suspends the ancient debate between what is computational and organic. For several centuries, people opposed what is computational and organic. But however, computation and life are no longer opposed. This is a synthetic biological leaf that was designed by Julian. And what it does is it absorbs water and carbon dioxide and releases oxygen back into the atmosphere, just like a plant. But it is a synthetic biological leaf. And you can imagine the kind of potential it has when it starts creating skins of buildings or skins of facades, considering the kind of pollution levels that we're actually dealing with, just beyond brick and mortar and beyond glass and other fenestration products. One of nature's marvels is the humble termite. Its brain is the size of a small grain of sand. However, it works in synergy with several termites to create incredible structures through bottom-up processes. As you can see, there is no master architect here giving directions. They work alongside each other based on genetically programmed rules of behavior. And together, as a swarm of single-minded entities, they create monumental mud structures. So what can we actually learn from social insects? Could we actually learn construction activities from social insects? How could we harness this kind of power? How could we design, build, and create structures, perhaps using technology and independent robots in the future? The basic standpoint is to understand how low-level actions of independent agents are connected to high-level emergent outcomes of the collective. I don't know if any of you have actually seen these cathedral termite mounds in Australia. If you go to northern Australia, rather the tip of North Australia, a lot of these national parks are there. And some of these giant termite mound cathedrals exist there. People go just there to see them. They're like a big tourist spot. And if you actually scale the termite to the scale of a human being, these termite mound cathedrals are basically 4 times the height of a Burj Khalifa, right? And it can take a population of a city like San Francisco, about 1 million people. So that is the potential that these systems have when we start learning from nature, or perhaps even try to look at how we could understand construction systems from social insects. This is a new kind of swarm intelligence, could be adapted to real-world constraints. And I'm talking about technology not for the nouveau rich. I'm not talking about embracing this technology for niche, high-funded projects. I'm not talking about projects that look at gentrification of urban neighborhoods. But literally, you can imagine the potential that this technology has in the time of a disaster, like a cyclone or perhaps earthquakes or flooding situations. Swarming robots could basically start even building levee walls along dangerously flooded coastlines. And the potential is that a lot of these bots could be used even in outer space. I don't know how many of you are actually following the story of Elon Musk and Mars and NASA and all the kind of Mars colony invasion. But that is the potential. And it can also work underwater, this kind of technology. So it can work on land, underwater, and in outer space. So I would like to put a thesis together, or a hypothesis together rather, saying that design is not equal to construction. We are a lot of architects in this room, and once we finish your CD, SD, design concept, we finish our DD, we finish our working drawings, push it out, that is the end of the role of an architect, so to speak, right? We only have periodic supervision, but construction is not an innovative process. So it is through that definition that I'd like to propose that design is not equal to construction. An architect has a very limited role to play. Once the construction is off the ground, you will select materials, you will go on site, give your feedback, give your reports, whatever's under your contract. But really, the role of an architect slightly gets undermined once construction starts. That is about to change if you start embracing technologies such as 3D printing. The bottom image is a it's a 5-story 3D printed tower in China. And this building was printed in a matter of weeks. One of the critiques that I have of 3D printing technology, particularly with buildings, and here you can see a small render of a 3D printing bot printing an entire 1 BHK apartment. But one of the issues is that you only have a single nozzle which is extruding as you move around. The potential being that in the future you might have a swarm of nozzles. And a lot of these 3D printing processes that are very kind of, in a way, connected to the Euclidean XYZ axis might be something that people might want to challenge in the future. So if you look at robotic construction, programming is instruction and construction is basically equal to execution, which really means as designers, you could have a single pipeline that moves from design to concept to execution. There are lots of buildings that are getting 3D printed, and it's getting more affordable, it's getting cheaper with every passing second, but it's also getting more scalable. You could actually start creating much larger objects. In contemporary design processes, there exists a little definition between the abstract and concrete, and there basically exists no gap between code and matter. This is a 3D printed bridge, which is going to be unleashed over a small canal in Amsterdam in 2019. And what it means is advances in software mean that materials are becoming the new media. We're looking at drone technologies and drone technologies that are being used currently in the construction industry. I'm not talking about swarming drones flying around and putting bricks together, but this is how drones are being used in construction in the West. They're being used for land surveys, they're being used for building inspections, they're being used for providing visual material for clients and staff, monitoring on-site activities, project management, security surveillance, and mapping data. This is a map of the estimated commercial drone spending over the next 5 years. And if you look at India, India is right up there. We're going to be spending about $2 billion, 2 billion pounds, 1.78 billion pounds to be precise. It's about 1/12 of what the US is basically spending. And at NUDES, we're basically trying to ask these questions as to how we could operate within the discourse of both research and practice and education and experimentation using real-world constraints. So we basically operate within the realm of cross-disciplinary cultures of public art, architecture, and computational design. And I'm just going to show you a very few images of some of the projects that we're working on. This is a mosque, which is a design competition in Dubai. Models of the past cannot operate as blueprints of the future. When science fiction has become fact, architecture today has to move beyond representation, beyond the fixed and finite tendencies that declare what architecture should be, and we should probably work towards what it could be. Architecture today must participate and engage with information-rich environments that are shaping our lives by constructing frameworks that allow for change and embrace the unknown. And just a few kind of projects that we work across a bunch of typologies, housing, retail, public art, architecture. And the big question that I think we're trying to ask is how do we empower the act of space making by researching through nature, perhaps even learn from researching on social insect behavior and construction technologies, but how we could actually harness cutting edge technologies to embrace the unknown. Thank you very much.